Tonight, you'll be hearing 5 stories told by the descendants of Holocaust survivors, plus one by Matt. Obviously, these stories are not always easy to hear, and certainly for the people telling them, not always easy to tell. But it's so important to continue to tell them and make sure, it's so important to continue to tell them to make sure that these events are never forgotten, and so that we can hear exactly what happened from the people who lived through it and grew up with those who lived through it, not to let other people who have their own motives tell these stories. Additionally, coming together to listen to these stories strengthens our community and deepens our understanding of the Jewish experience. As we all know, public speaking is the favorite thing of very few people, and telling stories like this adds a layer of vulnerability on top of that. And really looking out at a bunch of people who have their nice faces on and are actively wishing them well makes a huge difference. Our first storyteller tonight is Phyllis Shaw. Phyllis lives in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and is retired from her career in customer service and information systems. These days, she has moved away from corporate life and is pursuing her passions, including carrying on her mother's legacy. So prior to each of our shows, I always ask our storytellers a question that I will use throughout the night when I'm introducing them to help us get to know them better. And this time I asked everybody, if you could have brunch with a famous Jewish person from history, who would you choose? I thought brunch was better than dinner because it's just a little more cash, and you could really kibitz over like waffles and mimosas and like hang. So that's what I was thinking. You can think about your people and talk about that at intermission. So I would likely have to crash Phyllis's hypothetical brunch because she is inviting Gilda. Here's what she said. I would like to have brunch with Gilda Radner to find out how she would poke fun at the world today. She was my favorite cast member of Saturday Night Live, and I loved all her sketches, especially Emily Litella. I had to watch those. I wasn't sure who that was, but she did, yeah. And do you guys know her, Emily Litella? What's the fuss about violins on television? Although she left this world far too young, she also raised awareness of cancer treatments and prevention. I very much support that choice, Phyllis. Please welcome Phyllis Shaw.
I am approaching the college auditorium with my mother. We are to see Elie Wiesel speak. Elie was my mother's hero. He was from the same region of Romania as she was, about the same age, and she so admired the fact that he was worked so hard to spread the information about the Holocaust and what hate could do. As we approach the front doors of the auditorium, I see that there are people holding up signs and shouting, and I couldn't quite see what they had on their poster boards. As we got closer, I realized that their signs were saying that the Holocaust never happened. And they were shouting at people as they were walking into the auditorium. I wanted to grab my mother and just run back to the car, because I just didn't know how she was going to react to this. But she clearly saw what was going on, and now I was scared, because I didn't know what she was going to do. It's 1944. My mother, Regina Gans, has been uprooted from her home in Romania into a ghetto along with her sister Esther. They were given very little time to pack up, 24 hours, pack up a bag, bring some food, and enter this ghetto. In a very short period of time, a place that was probably hold about 1,000 people held 8,000 people. The little food that they had went away really quickly. And my mother tells a story of how she had to search through garbage bins in the ghetto in order to find food scraps that she and Esther could live on. This went on for a few weeks, and then they were told that they needed to go to the nearby train station. They didn't know what was happening. They lived in a very small village, not aware probably of what was going on in other parts of Europe. They were marched to this train station and shoved into cattle cars. No windows, no bathrooms, hardly any place to sit down, and only the little bit of food, again, that they could bring with them. My mother said that that lasted about 7 days. Some people did not survive the trip. When they disembarked from the train, they were told that they were in a place called Auschwitz. And again, she had no understanding of what was going to happen there. But she started to see that people were lining up in different ways. The men were separated from the women, And then the women were put on one side, and as she saw towards the end of that line, they were separated yet again. And when she looked closely to see the difference between the two lines, she saw that one had women and children and the elderly, and the other had women only. As they were approaching the front of that line, where the guard station was, she heard someone from behind shout to her sister Esther in Yiddish, "Give away your child, give away your child." And Esther held close to her baby, she was about a year old. And then at one point, that same guard came and tried to grab the child out of her arms, but Esther would not let go. So Esther went on one line, Regina went on another, and needless to say, she never saw her again. Once that process was over, she was told, stripped of all of her belongings, marched naked in front of the guards so they could ensure that in fact she was healthy enough to work, given prison clothes, and then sent into a barrack. A few days later, in the barrack, she heard a young girl's voice, "Rivka, Rivka, where are you, Rivka?" Rivka was my mother's Yiddish name. Turns out this was her younger sister, Shprinza. Shprinza had also been sent to the same camp from a different ghetto, and from that point forward, the two sisters stayed together as best as they could and did whatever they could to make sure that they kept each other alive. There were lineups every morning. You had to prove that you were healthy enough to work. Those that were not healthy went off to probably the gas chamber. Those that were healthy, some remained in Auschwitz, some were sent to other places. My mother and Shprinza were sent to a hard labor camp where they had to dig ditches, cut down trees, haul rocks, because the Nazis were building some kind of a factory or a building there. This went on for weeks, maybe even months, and at different points in time, both of them were very sick. But they kept that promise to each other, kept each other alive, made sure that they could still stand for lineup in the morning and go to work. But eventually, Regina just could not stand anymore. And they hid her inside the barrack, hoping that maybe nobody would realize that she wasn't coming out for lineup. That worked for a little while, but then her hiding spot was found, and what she called the SS man came and dragged her out of the barrack and told her she needed to go to the sick barracks. By this point in time, I think most of the prisoners there knew that she never came back from the sick barracks. Her younger sister, again, Shprinza, again, not wanting to be away from her sister at all, pretended that she was also sick, and she also went to the sick barracks. From there, the two of them were transported to another camp called Dachau, and at this point in time, it was towards the end of the war. It's about February 1945. And they were marked on their backs as being in queue, so to speak, for the gas chamber. So their days were limited. But because it was the end of the war, a lot of the guards that were in Dachau started to leave. They did not want to be prisoners of war. They were already anticipating the fact that that camp was going to be liberated. And so Regina and Shprinza tried to hold on as best they could. And miraculously, they found another sister. So this was her older sister, Nellie. Nellie had come from Hungary and still had food and still had her own clothing. And as I said, there were less and less guards in the camp, so the three sisters now had enough leverage, if you will, to forage for food, and that's how they kept each other alive until liberation. So on April 26, 1945, Dachau was liberated by the American Army. And my mother tells a story of how she saw the American troops coming in, some on foot, some on tanks, and they were just couldn't believe what they were seeing. They started handing out food. They had canned goods, and they wanted so desperately to help these poor people. And so, unfortunately, many of the people died just from eating those canned goods. At this point in time, it's a little unclear from my mother's point of view what was happening. I think at this point she was really so sick that she just doesn't remember. But she came from a family of 12 children. She had 9 sisters and 2 brothers. She knew that her 2 sisters were okay, but she had no idea about the fate of the rest of her family. As it turns out, her 2 brothers survived as well. She found that out later on. But of the entire family, the 12 children, my grandparents, and many of her older sisters and brothers were already married, had their own children, there were 45 people just in that one family. And after the war, there were 5. I wanted to learn more about my ancestors. I wanted to understand where they came from, how they lived. And so in 2019, my husband Brad and my 2 children went on a trip to Romania, and we hired an interpreter so that we can go to the town where she grew up. It was a beautiful town up in the Carpathian Mountains, very lush and green, just as she had described it. And we went to the town hall, and we asked to see the records. Certainly there would be birth records, marriage records, death records from a family that had been there since the 1800s, mid-1800s. And the clerk took the ledgers off the wall. They were all on shelves, all in the room. I asked to see things starting from about 1920 to 1940. And as we start looking through the records, there was absolutely no record of my family ever living there. There was nothing, not an entry of any of these people. As it turns out, they said that all of the records for the Jewish people were kept in the synagogues. There were 3 synagogues in this town. The whole town consisted of about 5,000 people, 1,000 of which were Jewish. And they told us that the 3 synagogues all were destroyed by fire. So there was absolutely nothing left of this family. We were so disappointed. I was so disappointed, not able to learn anything about my ancestors. But I know that they lived there. My mother talked warmly about her childhood, and I know that they thrived there for a limited period of time. So now back to the auditorium. We're walking towards the doors, and my mother stops, and she says, I'm going to go talk to these people. I'm going to go tell them what really happened. I'm going to educate them, because that's what Ellie Wiesel does. And that's what she wanted to do. And I said, no. I held on to her tightly, said, you're not going to do any good by doing that. Let's go in and hear what Ellie has to say. So thankfully, she agreed. We went inside, and Ellie addressed it right away. He said, please don't be upset by these people outside. They are ignorant, and we are here to learn how to teach people about what hate can do. And my mother calmed down a little bit, and I was thankful for that. She continued to tell her story, not only to me and my brother and sister as we grew up, but to all of her grandchildren. And she would also visit her grandchildren's schools. And she was very brave to do that. And therefore, in her honor, I am trying to be brave and share her story with you. Thank you.
That was great, Phyllis. That was really excellent. It's the only way to combat what you experienced, is to continue to tell the stories and to hear the stories. So thank you for doing that. You did a great job.